Before we get into the stories, I'm excited to announce I have a new channel called Monster Trail Cams. Here's a quick trailer for my new channel. The link is below. Monster Trail Cams is your ticket to the unseen and supernatural. Sourced from a vast network of mystery hunters worldwide, our channel reveals a collection of strange creatures and supernatural events that will leave you on the edge of your seat. From shadowy figures lurking in dense forests to inexplicable entities prowling under the cloak of night, each chilling clip peels back another layer of the world's untold mysteries. We release new episodes several times a week. Okay, now let's get to the stories. A few months ago, we got a new security system for our house that included 2 mounted cameras. One was on the doorbell, and another was a motion sensor camera that looked out over the backyard. We didn't live in a bad area or anything, but people stealing packages off of porches wasn't unheard of, and we ordered a lot of stuff online. We also had 2 dogs, and when the camera detected motion, we got a notification. Soon our dogs figured out they could activate the backyard sensor to let us know that they wanted back inside. We had a huge yard in a rural area, so we let them out to run around the yard whenever they wanted. This new system worked out well, at least until something started tripping our camera at all hours of the night. The little dinging notification would wake me or my husband up a few times a week, and it drove us crazy. At first, we just turned our phones off at night, once the dogs were inside. But we were definitely still curious about what was out there. We tried watching the video, but the quality wasn't great in the dark, and we never saw anything clearly. Sometimes we thought we saw a blur at the edge of the yard, but it could have been a shadow or anything really. So we gave up and started to ignore the notifications. A month later, one of our dogs came home injured. He had some bloody scratches and bite mark punctures. He was whimpering like crazy, and we freaked out. We rushed him to the vet to get him all patched up. Luckily, he was going to be okay, but the vet gave him a bunch of shots just in case. When we asked what could have done that, the vet was stumped. He said the bite marks were vaguely canine, but too big to be a domestic dog. They didn't quite match anything he was familiar with. For a while after that, we were really careful about keeping the dogs close to the house. We watched them at all times when they were in the yard, and we didn't let them stay out long. We also noticed that our dog that had been attacked had no interest in getting too far from the house. We talked about different ideas, like fencing in a smaller area, but the dogs were energetic and loved being able to run. We decided to wait and see if anything else happened. It had been months without an incident, so we started cautiously letting them stay out longer and not watching them every second. We were hoping it had been a freak occurrence. And for a while it seemed fine. But then one evening, a little before dusk, we heard them barking like crazy. We nervously ran outside and called to them. At first they didn't come to us, and they stayed at the edge of our property, barking and growling at something we couldn't see. We keep calling them. It took a while, but eventually they did come. That night, I left my phone volume up. I don't know why, but I just wanted to know if something was out there after all. Especially if it was whatever had previously attacked our dog. I couldn't sleep and kept alternating watching out the window and keeping an eye on the security system app. By 1 a.m, nothing had come past, so I relaxed and fell asleep. Luckily, when the ding sounded on my phone, I was only half asleep. I shot up and grabbed my phone. I looked at the video and saw that dark blur again. Something was out there. I was sure of it now. I woke my husband, and he grabbed a baseball bat because that was all we had. And we both slowly went downstairs without turning on any lights. We looked out the back door window and watched for the black blur. We didn't turn on the light because we didn't want to scare anything away or alert it to us being there before we got a good look. It took about 10 minutes before we saw it move, but there it was, big and dark, walking way down at the far edge of the property. And when I say walking, I mean walking upright, like a person, not on all fours. It was so weird. We had been expecting an animal, but wondered if it was a person after all. Maybe someone lurking around looking for stuff to steal. I'd been sure that the thing that had attacked our dog was the same thing in the backyard, but now I was confused. Did we have a dangerous wild animal on the loose and a creepy guy? What were the odds of having both? We kept watching, hoping to get a better look so we could tell the police something useful if we needed to. Eventually, it came closer to the house, just close enough for us to see it in the moonlight. We saw fur. Fur everywhere. The person or thing was tall, really tall, but covered in fur. It didn't make any sense. It was coming closer to the house now. If it came any closer, I planned to turn on the back floodlight and see it. It took a few minutes, but it did come close enough. I reached over and flipped the light switch, flooding the backyard with light. The thing screeched and turned and ran, but not before we saw it clearly. We saw the tall, dark, furry body and also the face, the horrible face. It was dog-like, with a canine-looking snout and long, sharp teeth. The worst part was the eyes, though. Reddish-orange and glowing as they glared at us before running off. The thing had looked like a demonic dog person. We called the police and animal control, but once we explained how we had seen this strange creature walking around with glowing eyes, they thought we were crazy. We even sort of thought we were too. How could this thing really exist? We got a half-hearted promise from the police that they would search the woods and set some traps, but we could tell that it probably would never happen. And wouldn't you know, they never did come back. This was told to me by my grandfather. It's about something he experienced way back in the 1940s, right after World War II ended. He had just got out of the service and was working for his dad on a small cattle farm in rural Iowa. One morning, his dad pulled him out of bed early because the cattle had gotten out a hole in the fence and wandered off into the woods behind his house. It was nearing winter. There wasn't any snow on the ground just yet, but temperatures were already beginning to dip under freezing, and there was a thin layer of frost on the ground, which made it pretty easy to track where the cattle had run off to. When I say cattle, of course, I'm not talking about the huge 200 or 300 head herds that you would expect from a cattle ranch today. Back then, my great-grandfather had about 10 cows and a bull was all, so the whole herd had gone missing pretty easily and quickly once they found the breach in the barbed wire. The cows aren't the stars of this story, though. Those 10 were found right off and put back in pretty easily. It was the bull, a big brown brindled monster of an animal that my grandpa and his dad called Jed, that would prove to be the problem. Jed was a longhorn bull my great-grandfather had hauled home from Texas when he first bought the farm. He'd got him cheap on account of him having lost his eye to a coyote attack, but aside from being blind on one side, he was a perfectly good bull and capable of getting the job done. Great-grandpa was the first longhorn owner in the county he lived in Iowa, and had hopes of crossbreeding them with Angus to create a better beef herd. The problem with Jed, even before this fateful day, was that he was aggressive and impossible to get corralled anywhere if he didn't want to be. This meant Grandpa and his dad were in for a real hell of a morning trying to get him back into the pasture once he was free out in the woods. Long story short, they wound up chasing Jed back straight through those woods and right into the quartz quarries on the other side. There was a big pit at the quarries that had filled up over time with water. The local kids loved to go swimming there, but it was so deep that local folklore always told that there was no bottom to it. You can probably guess where that dumb bull wound up running into. According to Grandpa, they did everything they could to get him out, but he fought them off while swimming the best he could until exhaustion overtook him. When he died, he sunk to the bottom and everyone waited for his body to float back up, but it never did. Not long after that, they put a fence around the pit to keep folks out of it, and the fence stood for 60 years or so before it first started rotting away. The quarries had long since been abandoned and were no longer a work site. It just became a local oddity to stumble upon in the woods every now and then. Someone would share the story of the longhorn bull that sunk to the bottom and never came back up. I want to say it was 2005 or 6 that it finally did, though. Just not in the way anyone expected. It was pretty dry that summer, and the water in the pit had gone down quite a bit. It was fall, and that means it was hunting season, and a couple hunters had wandered out into those woods hunting a deer when they heard all kinds of grunting and commotion going on at the old quarries. When they walked up to it, they thought someone must be playing a practical joke because inside that fence there stood a huge one-eyed brown brindle bull, just like the old town folk story had told. My dad was the sheriff by then, and when they got the call of a bull stuck in the old quarry fence, he swung by and got Grandpa to go with him, just for the spectacle of it all. They too thought it was a prank until they got there. I came along for the ride too. Being a small town, I was able to occasionally get away with tagging along with Dad while he worked, and I wanted to see the bull for myself. When we got there, Grandpa looked like he was seeing a ghost. He kept pointing out markings on the bull's body and saying over and over to us, "It's the same dang bull. I swear to God above, it's the same dang bull." When the bull saw my grandpa, it calmed down and pushed its nose through a gap in the rotten fence planks. Grandpa gave him a pet and said, "It's you, isn't it, Jed?" As hard as it was to believe, there was no denying that Grandpa firmly believed the bull to be the same one that fell back in the 1940s, and the bull seemed to recognize Grandpa too. All at once, though, the bull backed up and balked like he had become spooked by something. Then he stepped backward and fell back down into the pit. Again, everyone kept an eye on it, but the bull never did come back up. The next year, they brought in cement trucks to try to fill the pit back up. After a week of pouring and still no bottom in sight, they gave up on the effort. Today, there's a big concrete slab over the top and a newer, more secure fence built around it. I can't really explain what happened there that day. All I know is that that bull had somehow fallen in that pit and come back a half-century later. I still wonder if it was just a small-town folklore prank that's been going on for decades. I know no one will ever believe the story I'm about to tell. Ever since I was a little kid, I've never liked bugs. Growing up in PA, the cicadas that came out every couple of years made me basically bedridden. If I went outside and one of those things landed on me, I was screaming bloody murder. I'm sure I'm not the only one that doesn't like bugs. Anyway, my older sister, by about 2 years, goes to college down in West Virginia. I'm finally at that age now where she respected me enough to let me come down and visit with her and her friends. Of course, I loved that because a few of them are really cute and tend to pay a lot of attention to me. It used to be a really good time, honestly, but now I can't step a foot across the state border without going into a full-on panic attack. So I'm down there for the weekend about 3 months ago, just hanging with her and her friends. If you're not from a rural area, you might not know what I mean, but we were all at this giant field party, just everyone hanging out by the edge of the woods. And it isn't really like me, but on this day, I'm talkative as hell. I walked all around, met about 100 people I'll never meet again, and was having a great time. But that all came to an end very quickly when my sister and her roommates invited me to walk with them further down the field. Yeah, remember how cute they are. So we're all standing there and talking when all of a sudden I begin to feel the most uncomfortable random anxiety. I don't know what it was exactly, but I could just tell something was wrong. For starters, it was dark as hell out, and the only way we could really see around was with our phones. Not to mention, there was all of this buzzing sounds happening around us. Annoying as hell, because as I said, not a bug fan. Really not a bug fan. So we decided to continue walking, and the second we start to walk away, we all hear this gigantic, super loud buzzing sound. It was practically like we heard a lawnmower starting up nearby. On the edges of the field were just these thick forests, really tall trees and everything. That's where the sound was coming from, so we all kind of whipped our heads around. I'm over there having a dang heart attack because the first thing I thought of when I heard the buzzing was that there was some kind of swarm coming, or maybe we disrupted a hive. But it wasn't that. Nope. Not that at all. Crazy thing is that our fight or flight kind of turned into more of a stand and watch. We look around at the edge of the forest and we don't really catch a good look at anything until suddenly our friend Jen shrieks bloody murder. We don't even get a chance to ask her what she saw, because it was like she saw a ghost. She turned around and hauled herself as quick as she could back to the party. What gets me, really, is that nowadays when I bring it up to her or my sister, they insist that they didn't see anything. That is a total lie, plain and simple. But the thing is that I can't even blame them for trying to convince themselves otherwise. What we saw, that was the freakiest thing I've ever laid my eyes on. So she runs off and her boyfriend chases behind her, and the rest of us sort of glance around at each other because we're all way too nervous to check out the spot Jen was eyeing up before she bolted. Eventually, though, I turned my head to look. And let me tell you, I will never be able to forget the image. The first thing that I noticed was the eyes, because I know for sure that I've never seen an animal, person, or creature with eyes like those. They were practically the size of basketballs, those eyes. Gigantic, glowing, and bright red. Fire truck red, a really pure red that almost looked like it could be some kind of light. They looked absolutely unreal, and even worse, they looked disgustingly bug-like. But as I said, the eyes were just the first thing I noticed. The next characteristic, which is obviously what made it stand out so much, was the fact that this thing, this entity, whatever, was only a few inches taller than I was and had wings that unfolded as we were watching it. It was like it saw us. Now it's obvious why Jen screamed and ran. We just hear this buzzing, this insect-like clicking coming so loudly from the creature in front of us. We see it making the noises, though it's hardly close enough for us to make out any distinct facial features. In fact, I'll be honest, I don't know if the damn thing even had a face. We were all frozen in fear. We just stood in a staring match with this thing, and then, like a miracle, it flew away. It flapped its crazy, human-sized wings and flew deep into the forest. It was gone as fast as it came, and I still have no clue what the heck it was. I mean, I do have a tendency to overreact, but this was completely different. We all saw it, and all felt the same way. I couldn't have made this up, made up the fear we all felt about it. Anyway, now it's one of those things that we don't bring up anymore. But I will tell you this, that experience has caused me to be extra alert and cautious. And now I always remember to double-check the locks at night. I'm definitely not taking any chances. So I don't know how this will all play out. But one thing is for sure, I still do not like bugs. I grew up in West Virginia, and I've heard all of the stories about the creatures in the woods. My grandfather was superstitious and always told me that the land we lived on didn't belong to us. I kind of brushed all of the superstitious stuff aside because I never saw or experienced anything personally. That is until about a week ago when something bizarre happened. I live with my husband, but he had picked up an extra shift at work and I wasn't expecting him to be home until 2 in the morning, so I was home alone. I often have trouble sleeping when he's not home, so I was up watching some late-night cartoons with my cat, Fluffernutter. It was about 11 at night and I heard my husband Jim call my name. I was surprised he was home so early. Usually he will send a text when he is on his way. But I yelled to him that I was in bed watching TV and then just waited, expecting him to walk through the bedroom door. A minute passed, but he hadn't come in. I called for him again and waited for a response. For a moment I thought I might have imagined hearing him call my name, but at the same time a part of me was on alert. I muted the TV and listened carefully for any sounds from downstairs. After a moment, I heard him call my name again. Yep, it was the exact same voice I'd heard every day for the past 3 years. I was instantly at ease. He called my name again. There was no inflection in the voice, nothing to indicate what he was calling me for. It sounded a bit off, but I just figured he was tired or something. "What is it?" I finally yelled. I was still sitting in bed with the remote in my hand. He called my name again, but this time it sounded further away. I finally stood up from the bed and walked to the door. I flipped the hall light on, and just so you know, I watch way too many horror movies where they all walk around in the dark, so I wasn't about to do that. I looked down the stairs expecting to see Jim standing there, but the hall was completely empty. So I slowly started walking down the stairs. I was on edge already, and now it was getting worse. Something about this was totally creeping me out. I called out for Jim again, but didn't get a response. I walked through the house and flipped on every light looking for him. Eventually, I made it to the kitchen. I turned on the light and instantly noticed that the kitchen door to the back of the house was cracked open. Every part of my body screamed at me to turn around and go back upstairs, and I wish I'd have listened. But I moved forward. I knew I heard Jim and I wasn't going back until I saw him in case something was wrong. I opened the kitchen door the rest of the way and stood there in the doorway. We lived right at the edge of the woods. My grandfather owned the house before he passed it down to me, and he had built a large barn where he used to raise goats. I stared at the barn for a moment, wondering why the hell the light was on. We don't use the barn at all. It's old and rickety, and the wood is waterlogged and rotten. It isn't even safe to use for storage. I yelled for Jim again, but didn't get a response. All I could think about was why he would be in the barn this late at night, let alone home yet from work. I slipped on a pair of boots sitting by the door and started walking towards the barn. The closer I got to it, I could hear shuffling inside like someone was walking across the old crunchy hay. I heard my name being called again, but this time it didn't come from the barn. The voice came from the woods beside me. I stopped mid-stride with my eyes locked on the open barn door. I was about halfway between the barn and my house and completely petrified. And then, without any noise leading up to it, the light in the barn shut off. And now in the darkness I could see a pair of glowing yellow eyes. I immediately turned and booked it back to house, slamming the kitchen door shut and locking it. I grabbed one of the kitchen knives and hurried up the stairs to grab my phone. I was about to call the police when I saw a message from Jim. He had texted me saying he wouldn't be home until 7 in the morning because he was able to pick up overtime hours and told me not to wait up for him. It felt like my heart stopped beating when I read that. I knew for sure now that whoever or whatever had called my name wasn't Jim. I dialed 911 and explained to them that someone had just been in my house calling my name, and that I'd seen someone in my barn and asked him to send a patrol car over right away. One of the downsides of living in a small town in the country is how far you are from everything, how isolating it can be. It took 30 minutes for the police to arrive, and it felt like hours. I was crouching on the floor in the corner beside my bed, with the knife in my hand. The entire time I was waiting for the police, I kept hearing Jim's voice call my name. It felt like it grew more desperate every time it called for me, which was horrifying. As soon as I saw the lights from the cop car, I ran outside to safety. He walked the perimeter of my property and said he didn't see any signs of anyone. And even more terrifying, the barn didn't look like anyone had stepped foot in it in ages. He told me to get some sleep, and I could tell he thought it was all my imagination. Well, I didn't sleep at all. And to be honest, I drove to where my husband works and just sat in my car in the parking lot until he was off. I don't know who or what I'd seen and heard in our house that night, but I know it had to be something supernatural.